Korea requires overseas arrivals in the country to take PCR tests on the day of arrival, as part of new stricter measures amid a massive rise in COVID cases. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration will face a grilling from lawmakers this week in the new government's first parliamentary questioning session. The war in Ukraine shows no sign of winding down, over 5 months since Russia launched its invasion on February 24th. With multiple attempts at diplomacy having failed, the fighting and tragedies continue.
Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. The surge in COVID-19 is showing no signs of slowing down, with the country reporting more than 35,000 new cases as of 9 p.m. Sunday. This number is the highest in the same time period in a span of 2 months.
And beginning Monday, new prevention measures will kick in, starting with arrivals to the country. They will be required to take PCR tests, and our Peunji starts us off.
Starting Monday, all those arriving in South Korea will have to take a PCR test on the day they arrive, as part of the government's efforts to prevent the further spread of the virus during summer vacation season. South Korean citizens and long-term travelers will be able to take the test for free at their local public health centers. Those staying in the country for a short period of time are advised to take the test at the testing center located inside the airport. Those who test positive must quarantine for 7 days. The rules for overseas arrivals had been eased last month, giving them up to 3 days to take the PCR test. But this has been tightened again as the country deals with another wave of the virus. Since late June, the BA.5 variant, now dominant, has been spreading quickly. Also starting Monday, tighter rules will be in place for nursing homes. Visitors will not be allowed to make physical contact with nursing home residents and will only be able to meet with them through a glass window. Workers in these facilities will need to take a PCR test once a week if 3 months have not passed since they received their 4th vaccine dose, or if they have contracted COVID-19 in the past 45 days. The new stricter measures come as the country sees a rise in number of cases among people who are fully vaccinated and boosted. Peunji, Arirang News.
South Korean lawmakers will begin a 3-day inquiry into government agencies from Monday. This first inquest of its kind since the Yoon Suk-yeol government took office.
It's also the first time that Prime Minister Han Duck-soo will be grilled by lawmakers since the administration took office. And the Q&A session is set to begin at 2 p.m. with the focus being on politics, diplomacy and national security on the first day. Key issues will include the controversial probe into the killing of a South Korean fisheries official by the North Korean military, North Korean repatriations, as well as the newly set up Police Supervisory Bureau under the Interior Ministry. These topics had recently sparked fierce debate between Yoon's People Power Party and the opposition Democratic Party. The second and third day will cover matters related to the economy and society, respectively. Now continuing with the latest from the nation's legislative branch, today marks the first regular full-scale working day for South Korea's parliament, which comes later than originally scheduled due to a delay in forming standing committees.
For what was behind the delay and about the parliament's unique standing committee system, we have our political correspondent Lee Kyung-eun here in the studio. Kyung-eun, hello.
Hi.
First of all, could you tell us what has been going on in the nation's legislative branch?
Well, following a series of negotiations over the past month and a half, rival parties finally decided on how to share standing committees just last Friday. And that marks 53 days since the first half of this assembly session ended. So under the final agreement, the ruling People Power Party will head a total of 7 committees, while the majority Democratic Party will take 11. The two parties found it hard to strike a deal over 2 contentious committees responsible for broadcasting and police, as they're regarded as very sensitive issues for both parties following the newly set up Police Bureau at the Interior Ministry to oversee increased investigative rights of the police, as well as the debate over media independence. With both parties eyeing control, what they decided to do was to share the chairmanship, with each party taking control for a year.
Right, and coming from what I remember, the formation of these committees that have always been really problematic, taking weeks and weeks for lawmakers to agree on who's going to lead which committee. But why has this really been the case?
Well, to answer the question, I think we have to touch upon the unique parliamentary system in South Korea and the significance of standing committees to parties. If you look at the legislative procedure, once lawmakers introduce a bill, it gets reviewed and is often revised by the standing committee that's responsible. And upon committee's approval, the bill gets submitted to a plenary session where all lawmakers have final vote. Under this system, the more standing committee a party controls, the easier it is for them to push through bills. So there are a total of 18 standing committees, and under the law, parties can take leadership proportionate to the number of seats each party holds. But throughout the four-year assembly session, they get to reshuffle leadership posts twice, once at the beginning and the other at the halfway point after 2 years. And this is when we see fierce debate between rival parties, including in this assembly session.
Right, but there always seems to be several committees of particular concern, right?
That's right. It's sometimes not about how many committees they get, but about which party the committees get control of. So like this time, we saw the main focus being on the media and the public security committees. But traditionally speaking, 3 standing committees are deemed most critical. First, budget, where the government spending plans are approved. Second is the one in charge of issues related to the presidential office. And lastly, the judiciary committee, which has the authority to review, revise, and even reject bills before they go to a final vote. So technically, it serves as the upper house. So the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee has usually gone to the party with the second most seats, or the party with the most seats takes the Assembly Speaker position. This way, it could effectively prevent the majority party from unilaterally pushing through bills on their own. However, that custom was broken in the first half of this Assembly session because DP pushed ahead with taking control of all standing committees, including the judiciary, using its majority power after winning 180 out of 300 seats. It later vowed to transfer the chairmanship to the PPP in the second half, which is now, but that transfer process was also very rocky, resulting in weeks of negotiations. To prevent related controversies from causing delays to the opening of the Assembly session in the future, lawmakers have set up a special provisional committee on political reform. Among the items on the agenda are reviewing ways to reduce legislative authority of the Judiciary Committee as a way to root out the source of disputes, as well as enacting a law that prohibits lawmakers from leaving the parliament inactive.
Well, now that this political tug of war is over, hopefully we'll see our lawmakers get to work with our taxes, right? And well, thank you very much for your report, our political correspondent, Lee Kyung-eun.
Thank you.
US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has evaluated the country's economic growth as slowing, but not currently in recession based on strong employment figures and consumer spending. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday, Yellen said that the monthly average job gains in the US stood at around 375,000 for the last 3 months, which shows that the economy is in a transition period of slow growth. She also reiterated that inflation is much too high and recent Fed rate hikes were helping to bring soaring prices back in check, adding that she was hopeful of a solution that would keep the labour market strong and bring inflation down.
South Korea's health authorities are set to discuss monkeypox prevention measures this week following the WHO's decision to declare the disease a public health emergency of international concern, the highest level of alert the WHO can issue. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said on Sunday that the meeting will be more focused on assessing current monkeypox countermeasures rather than unveiling new rules. However, the exact date of the meeting has not been confirmed. On Saturday, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the disease has spread rapidly around the world through the new modes of transmission about which little is known. More than 16,000 cases of the virus have been reported around the world in dozens of countries.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. COVID-19 infections across the world are resurging, and there's a pattern to this with yet another new variant emerging, which may be a little less dangerous but more transmissible.
So with Omicron subvariant BA.2.75 now causing another wave of infections across the world, what can be done to minimize the impact this time around? Joining us to discuss, we have Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong, with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So first, BA.2.75 strain is yet another new subvariant that is causing concern. Could you explain how dangerous this new strain is?
Yeah, it's yet another subvariant of Omicron. We know that it's slightly more transmissible than BA.5 and what came before that, BA.2 and BA.1. And it's, in terms of the severity, it looks so far to be roughly similar to the other Omicron subvariants, which means milder than Delta, but still not necessarily very mild, particularly for people who haven't had COVID before. It's spreading very rapidly in some parts of the world, but it hasn't yet reached everywhere. I know in Korea you have a handful of cases. It may well be the next subvariant that dominates transmission locally, but I don't think it's a major threat because it's just another Omicron subvariant, and we know BA.4, BA.5 are already spreading around the world, in Europe and North America, and in Korea as well, causing a lot of infections already.
And well, Professor, you said that it's a subvariant of Omicron, but if you had been infected with Omicron, one of the earlier variants earlier during the year, then what are the chances that you can be infected with a new variant?
It depends a little bit on what exactly you got before and how long ago it was. If you got BA.1 earlier this year, that does not provide too much cross protection against BA.4, BA.5 and BA.2.75. But if you got BA.2 earlier this year, probably you do have some degree of cross protection. And you can see at the minute, BA.4, BA.5 is not rising as rapidly as the previous subvariants did because of that cross protection. But even if you're protected now because of your prior infection, most likely in the future there'll be a new subvariant or a new variant that gets around that immunity. So at the moment, in the last year or so, it looks like immunity is lasting between 3 and 6 months after an infection. And after that, because the virus is changing, you may have a chance to get infected again.
Right, so just a couple days ago, WHO just announced a new vaccination strategy to make sure vaccines are distributed fairly across the world. How important is it that people in low-income countries are also vaccinated? Will this stop new variants, possibly?
Well, the WHO announcement is re-emphasizing the aim that around the world, 70% of populations should get vaccinated, and 100% of healthcare workers and 100% of high-risk groups like the elderly, not only with 2 doses, but with 3 doses of vaccines. Whether that's going to be achievable, I don't know, because there's still supply limitations and cost issues and so on in some parts of the world. And there's also, in some parts of the world, less enthusiasm for vaccination, depending on the circumstances there. As to whether increasing vaccine coverage will reduce the emergence of variants, I don't think so. I think the variants are coming because the virus is finding a way round immunity, and that's whether the immunity comes from vaccines or from infections. Either way, I think that the virus will find new directions and new pathways to be able to continue to infect us, and that will not be stopped by high vaccine coverage.
But nevertheless, are vaccines going to continue to be updated? I mean, is there a point to playing this catch-up game all the time, or should there be more focus on treatments?
Well, no, we talked about updating vaccines for many times already, and I think it's really, really important. What's happening at the moment, I think in Europe, they're planning to get an updated vaccine with the BA1 strain, which actually is a little bit outdated already. And in the US, they've requested an updated vaccine with BA4 or BA5. That's going to take a little bit of time before it becomes available, maybe later this year. Now, of course, by that time, there may be another subvariant or another variant. So at the minute, it still seems like we are playing catch up, but at least the manufacturers and the regulatory agencies are looking to get updated vaccines, because we know we've got to do better at keeping up with the virus.
Right. Thank you. As always, it's always a pleasure speaking to you on our show, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
And that wraps up the first half of New Day at Arirang, but stay tuned because coming up in the second half,
we're going to connect to an expert on the resignation of Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, what comes next, and what will be the impact on Italy and the rest of Europe. So stay tuned.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. A top US military official has warned that the Chinese military have become significantly more aggressive in the air and sea of the Pacific region.
General Mark Milley, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Sunday that the number of intercepts by Chinese aircrafts and ships in the area has increased significantly over the past 5 years. The remarks were made during a trip to the Indo-Pacific to strengthen relations in the region. The U.S. has been redoubling efforts to bolster its relationship with Pacific nations as a counterbalance to Beijing, which aims to expand its presence and influence within the region. Now turning to war in Ukraine, with Russia's war against Ukraine entering its 6th month on Sunday, the United Nations have estimated that at least 5,000 civilians have been killed. With no end in sight, Moscow continues to expand its military objectives in Ukraine. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Attacks on key Ukrainian infrastructure continued on the 105th day of Russia's war against its neighbor. Moscow's missiles hit Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa on Saturday, just hours after the two countries signed agreements to allow grain exports to resume. Russian attacks continue across the country, with Moscow announcing earlier last week that its military objectives in Ukraine would now go beyond the eastern Donbas region, marking the clearest acknowledgement that the country has expanded its war goals. The UN estimates that some 5,000 civilians have lost their lives in Ukraine during the 5 months since the onset of Russia's invasion. While the actual casualty figure could be even higher than that, Ukraine's health ministry says at least 18 medical personnel had been killed and nearly 900 medical facilities had been damaged or destroyed so far. With the war entering its 6th month on Sunday, Ukrainian president vowed that his country would do all it can to fight against Russia.
So we don't let up. As in every day during the last 5 months, we do everything to inflict the highest possible damage on the enemy and to gather for Ukraine as much support as possible.
Against his backdrop, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed claims that Moscow was the cause of the global food crisis. Visiting Egypt, he stressed that it was Western nations who were distorting the truth about the impact of sanctions on global food security. He further elaborated that the West, including the US, Britain, and Germany, as well as many EU and NATO member states, was prolonging the conflict. Lavrov added that while Moscow stands ready to resume negotiations with Ukraine on a number of issues, Ukraine and the West have not agreed to return to the negotiating table. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Italy is looking at an early election after the country's Prime Minister Mario Draghi stepped down last week. His resignation came despite him having survived his coalition government's confidence vote. With major members of the coalition abstaining from voting, the Prime Minister said he won't govern without 100% support from his partners who, due to the cost of living crisis in the country, failed to garner support from key parties. Italy's parliament has now been dissolved ahead of early elections slated for September 25th, with the PM staying on as a caretaker leader until that point. Invited to the position of PM as a neutral and non-partisan force by the Italian president last year and a key figure in the European Union's economic leadership as well as its solidarity against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Draghi's departure leaves question marks not only for the future of Italian politics but also for the rest of the EU. We discuss the prospects ahead with Dr. An Jun-sung, visiting professor at Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies. Very warm welcome to you, Professor An. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. And, well, my first question, Professor, Mr. Draghi, he formed a coalition government last year, and he managed to do so, bringing together various different factions in Italian politics and getting them to really form this coalition force that governed the country for a year. But what led to the breaking point? What led to this breakdown in recent weeks that we've seen over the PM's cost of living measures?
Yes, well, we need to talk about what happened last year. So we have to go back, rewind our clock to the last year, what happened in Italy. And well, during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, the peak of the pandemic crisis, the former Prime Minister of Italy offered his resignation due to his cabinet's failure to cope with the pandemic situation. So Mario Draghi, and also known as the Super Mario, right, or the former president of the European Central Bank, was supported by the Italian political party to oversee effective implementation of economic stimulus in Italy, right? However, the Five Star Movement, one of the major party in Italy, right, opposed recently and a new decree concerning the economic stimulus to offset energy crisis. The big picture is that last year, because of the pandemic situation, the Italian political party got together and kind of agreed to support the Mario, Draghi for the prime minister. But now the things, pandemic is kind of going okay, right? So it's getting better in Italy's situation. What happened was that they become the Russian factor. So because of the Ukraine war, and there was concerning about the cost of living issues, and then about the the economy, to offset the energy crisis. So it's more like now it's the political party and the public deal with the more concern about economic crisis in Italy. So the political climate have been changed, and I think that's things happens in Italy right now.
And of course, coalitions and all these factions in Italian politics, they're nothing new. But Draghi was not elected to Parliament. He was, as you said, invited to form a government in February last year by President Sergio Mattarella. And well, how significant was Draghi's non-partisan stance in Italian politics?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question, because I was wondering as well, too, right? Because that I think there's a pro and cons. He's independent, right? He's independent, basically. So what happened was that the pros for being independent, right, prime minister, is that he can be neutral, so that he can basically he appointed he forms the cabinet mostly composed of the numerous party from the Italian politics, right? So it's become he can select many people who from different background, political, spectrums, right? So I think it's good for him to select the best, running or best, combination for this cabinet. Or the other side is that the downside for the being independent is that it's hard to maintain the support from the political parties. Politics change. The happen was just like what happened in Italy. So it's how to maintain the stable support from the political party. So, for example, as we talk about the 5-star movement, actually support him last year as to become a prime minister. But now they not changing, but they have to disagree on many issues, especially on the Ukraine issue. Something could relate to the crisis. Energy crisis, they have disagreement, so that's why he ended up resigning as the prime minister.
And as you said, he was largely appointed because of his experience, his very highly seasoned experience in handling economic affairs. And Italy's inflation rate, it hit 8% in June, which was its highest level since 1986. And well, failing to deliver on a very tight schedule of promised reforms from Rome's side, that could jeopardize the country's ability to receive 200 billion euros from the EU's recovery fund. So would you say that the PM's departure is worrying for the country's economy?
Yes, I agree. Because that just looking at a single fact that before they become the prime minister of Italy, he was served as the president of European Central Bank for I think it's over about 8 years. So, and then he also he had a quite experience at the European Union, right? So as the economic leader, so he had a very strong background. He's technicians, right? Basically, he was a technocratic, and so he knows what to do, and he's a very well-seasoned banker, also economist, right? So he knows what to do on the economic crisis here. However, the concern is that but 2 points about he's like pro-EU and anti-Russia in his political stance, right? However, because of his departure I think that's a very, very bad sign for the European Unions and other members of European Unions, because that Italy might change their direction. Depends on what happens, who's going to be next prime minister in Italy, and most likely, according to the recent poll, right, it's more like someone who from the right-wing side will be the most likely become the next prime minister in Italy, that would change the foreign relations of Italy also, especially for the EU, other EU countries. Right, that's very concerning, because they need to get the support from the continued support from the Italian government in many issues, especially on the war against Russia, Ukraine war, right? Basically, so that's very concerning. Not only economic perspective, and in terms of the EU perspective, it's a big loss for the EU, and I think it's a really big challenge for the Italian politics, I think, in the future.
Right, and during the last parliamentary elections, Professor, 5-Star was the largest party in Italy's parliament when the elections were last held in 2018. And well, what do you expect to see this year? Do you think it's going to basically be the end of centre-left Italian politics?
Well, that was a tough call, right? Well, we'll have to see what happened. But it seems like, according to the recent poll, it seems like more like the right wing, right side will be have the take control most likely and control the parliament in Italy, right? But however, you have to see what happens. So especially, I think that recently the news covers on the president of the Brothers of Italy, one of the biggest political party, which it seems like they will controlling in the next election, right? So what happened was that there was the international news coverage about is it going to be our first female prime minister in Italy in the history of Italy, right? So we'll have to see what happened, and also that many experts concerned about the political parties, and they're more really left, really, I mean, they're right wing, basically. I'm sorry, they're the right wing. So what happened was that they were concerned about who's going to be the next prime minister, also how we're going to change the current position about the many issues, international issues, yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And you've mentioned this before, the question of European unity with Draghi's departure. So once he leaves office and, say, a right-wing party or right-wing parties form a coalition and take power, then what would that really mean for the European Union as a whole?
Yeah, once again, I think Draghi's departure it's really big challenge in the loss actually from the EU perspective, because that he really believe in the EU, right? So because he not only his technical background, also the professional background, he used to work with the EU right side, and he was the really economist, and then really so a lot of work with the EU. So he was pro-EU. So he really strongly believed that Italy have to stay with the EU, right? EU side, right? But however, the right wing parties have a different view. They have, for example, about immigration or the war, Ukraine. They have a different view of the right wing, right? So it's more like anti-immigrations, anti-refugee issues. There's a really big issue in EU side. Also, not only the EU, I think that's to the international community. And it depends on really who's going to be next prime minister. There was a big challenge to not only to the EU and the international community, how they handle the situation. So as we know that the pandemic situation, is getting better, but still we have some of the Omicron situation, other the variants also happening, not only in Europe and in Korea, in Asia and other Asian countries. And then that's the things that how they will wait and see what happened, and then see that the Italian politics, right?
Well, Mr. Draghi's presence will certainly be missed in Brussels, not least for his very seasoned navigation of Europe's economic affairs. And well, he was, of course, credited for saving the Eurozone when he was the president of the European Central Bank. And well, what does his departure really have? What kind of implications will his departure have for Brussels?
Well, well, as I mentioned earlier, right? So basically, I guess that Italy is a big player in the EU, right? And they need to good support whatever they do, right? So during his term, Draghi's term, right? There was his cabinet was very friendly and were willing to work with the EU, many different issues, right? Especially like Ukraine war, and they do handle the situation with the EU very effectively with other leaders at the European countries as well. So and also as a European Central Bank president, who he did a lot of had a very very strong professional achievement and how to deal with the Euro situations, and I think that's really got pretty good credentials and how to deal with the situation. But problem was the Draghi situations that he was the technocrat, so it's not really the really the politician. It's not a career politician. So what happened was that he didn't have really a strong political backup. So it's a problem. So, but considering his popularity, I mean, as the prime minister, I think it's kind of concerned. I'm really worried about what happened in the next, the government in Italy, because that he was very strong support from and really one of the highest, support rate, approval rate. Actually, throughout the recent history of the Italian politics. So I think it's a great loss for the Italian government, also the people, and during the crisis. I mean, not only now it's say pandemic crisis is kind of, we getting over to the pandemic crisis. Now we have a new energy crisis stemming from the Ukraine war, right? The Ukraine crisis, right?
So I think it's a huge loss for not only the Italian people in terms of dealing with their economy, but the rest of Europe as well, because he was seen as a key policymaker really behind devising the sanctions against Russia as well. And they definitely would need him in Brussels to deal with this pan-European inflation and the cost of living crisis that they're facing. So it couldn't have come at a worse time really for Europe. And well, the big worry, though, is this growing Euroscepticism. Do you see European politics continuing to move to the right, or do you think we will just continue to see this kind of trajectory in the rest of Europe?
Yeah, I afraid so, because what happened was that think of same thing happening in Korea and many countries, right? During the pandemic crisis, right? So people try to get support their leaders, right? Because there's big crisis, and it's not a political issue; it's the pandemic situation. But now many people, whatever is true, but they're kind of recovering from the pandemic crisis, so that they now their focus now moved to the economic issues. Is the economic better? But what happened was in most countries, including the Korea and other countries, right? Happened was that during the pandemic situation, well, especially in EU, they have to shut down all the businesses, for many times. So there was the economics went really bad. So now they have to stimulate their economic situation. That's how the things happen, right? So now that they concerned about the focus changing from the pandemic to the economic, right, to economic situation. So that's things that people more focused on the borders. We're concerning about how can we effectively improve the economic situation. But however, the thing about the situation in Italy, right? Draghi is a former banker and economist who would do best. I think that from based on his credentials, right? He might be the best candidate for the country like Italy to dealing with many economic crises also, right? So I'm very concerned about what happens in Italy, because there is great loss to the Italian and not only to Italy and the EU, right?
Right, and in the greater realm of international politics, the question of working with the US and the NATO solidarity, where do you think Italy is really headed? Should it go with should citizens pick a right-wing party or a coalition of right-wing parties, rather?
Well, it's a tough question, right? Because we can't tell we can't say what happened in Italy, right? In the election, right? It's a September election, so we have a snap election, which is actually the first time actually they have an election in the September, right, fall, right? So what happened was that the big change happening in Italian politics as well. So we'll have to wait and see what happened. But it's most likely what happened was that the right wing party, one of the right wing will be controlling both houses in Italy. The parliament, right? So whatever was to have to see how they handle the situation. So, but however, as we anchor said, right, we're saying that my concern is that maybe it's not only the Italian problem, right? Italian government problem. Maybe some UK also having this very similar happens, and many European countries and growing number of European countries facing very similar situation, that people more concerned about economics, development. Now they were focused on the more politics, politics rather than the pandemic situation. So it's more like they become more politics, and they will see looking at their national interest rather than the international interest. So things happens. So we'll have to I hope that the leaders and the people in Europe want to make the right choices in terms of the improving international cooperations, not only for the pandemic situation, also the war in Ukraine, right?
Right, thank you very much for your time today, Dr. An Jun-sung, Visiting Professor of Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies.
Right, thank you.
Many Koreans with office jobs choose to work remotely from the kinds of places they might take a holiday. One of the most popular workcation destinations is Jeju. Lee Dae-yeon takes us to the southern resort island.
38-year-old Yoo Min-hyuk is staying on Jeju Island for a month to enjoy a peaceful time with his family in a small and quiet village. But he cannot put his job as an office worker aside.
I'm here on workation for the first time as a reward for my accomplishments in the first half of this year. My colleagues who have been on workation said it was quite refreshing.
Combining the words work and vacation, this new trend allows workers to take a break from their usual place of work, but not the work itself. And one of the most popular domestic workation spots these days is Jeju Island. According to a survey conducted by one of the biggest job searching websites, Jeju Island was selected as the most popular workation location for office workers, accounting for over 76% of responses. There are even co-working spaces here too.
This is one of the open space offices designed for people who come Jeju for a so-called workation. People can enjoy beautiful natural scenery while doing their work in a quiet space. And demand for these spaces is seeing a dramatic rise.
The space provides not only a quiet workspace, but also offers other conveniences for workers. One shared office space owner says she's seeing a high reservation rate these days.
When I first opened this place 3 years ago, the idea of a workation was unfamiliar to many people. But since the outbreak of COVID-19, more and more people are visiting open working spaces on Jeju. Workers used to have to take time off to enjoy nature on Jeju, but now they can enjoy it after work.
And this is becoming an opportunity for Jeju to boost tourism on the island.
Jeju Tourism Organization is working to develop tourism in local counties by rolling out workation programs based on local accommodation, activities, and food. This is the one and only tour program that can be enjoyed only in Jeju's local villages, which will lead to local economic growth.
She added the organization also plans to run its own open spaces for workers next month to meet rising needs, while cooperating further with private companies to encourage more workations to Jeju Island. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News, Jeju.
Now, of all things, many foreigners say that they're visiting South Korea for the food. Over time, K-dishes have evolved from the traditional kimbap or tteokbokki. Our Choi Min-jung turns the spotlight to the related gastronomic trends.
What's the first food that pops into your mind when thinking about Korea? Tteokbokki or kimbap? Well, these are South Korea's most loved soul food, but you have to know that there is so much more to taste when you visit Korea. When searching for world-class restaurants, many food lovers consult guidebooks like the famous Michelin Guide. In South Korea, one of the most popular guidebooks is the Blue Ribbon Survey. Based on objective evaluations from both the general public and food critics, restaurants and cafes are given up to 3 ribbons. And the more ribbons, the better the restaurant. One of the other platforms Koreans often use is Mango Plate. It's a location-based restaurant discovery service for people in Korea, similar to Yelp in the US. Fusion Korean dishes are gaining popularity among those who wish to taste high-end Korean cuisine. This restaurant here is famous for its Hansik omakase course meal, which is the combination of Hansik, which means Korean food, and omakase, a Japanese dining style where the chef chooses the meal for you. The traditional omakase is based on sushi, but Mango Plate says Korea has begun to see many new types of omakase using ingredients ranging from Korean beef to gnocchi.
For 2 hours, from the first course until the very end, people can comfortably enjoy food that goes well with alcohol. We change our menu every 3 months based on which ingredients are in season.
The Korean pork tteokgalbi burger is the restaurant's most popular dish.
My favorite is the tteokgalbi burger. The cheese and the bread coated with meat juice also gives a smooth texture.
Besides these dishes, the meal also includes a protein dish, a seafood dish, rice, and a traditional Korean dessert. More and more people are visiting South Korea's most popular tourist destination, Jeju Island, and many of them are here for the food. From black pork barbecue to fresh seafood and citrus fruits, there's so much to enjoy.
We recommend that foreigners visit Jeju Island. Jeju is a great place to visit during spring, summer, autumn, and winter. It would be great for people to enjoy food that's popular each season.
Gosari Yukgaejang is a traditional Jeju dish. Families used to make the dish using an entire pig for events like weddings or national holidays. Everything is done by hand, from making the pork broth to ripping the meat in ferns.
Jeju is particularly well known for gosari, as the island's conditions are ideal for the plant to grow.
How do you like it?
It tastes really good, man.
Really? Is it a familiar taste?
Yeah, it's kind of like the meat soup I get in my country.
Really?
Yeah, it tastes really good.
Would you recommend this to your friends outside?
Absolutely. I mean, what's the name of the restaurant?
Another go-to spot is this cafe that sells top-notch coffee using tangerines grown on Jeju. This cafe has 2 blue ribbons and is run by the winner of the 2016 Korea National Barista Championship.
Our signature coffees are the tangerine cappuccino, iced tangerine latte, and yuzu americano. Our cafe is on a 40-year-old tangerine orchard, and when it's winter, we use Jeju tangerines to make the coffee.
Now that I've had my coffee, I'm full and feeling good. All the food that I've shown you, though, is just the tip of the iceberg. We hope you can see that the cuisine is something you've got to make the most of if you're planning to visit South Korea. 최민정, Arirang News, Jeju.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley, standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Let's start in Greece, where wildfires are tearing through parts of the country.
Well, that's right, Doyon. Hundreds of residents and tourists on the Greek island of Lesbos have been evacuated as wildfires threaten to engulf local villages. Now, some 50 local firefighters, 17 fire trucks and firefighting aircraft are being helped by volunteers to tackle the blaze. Since the fires started on Saturday, more than 450 people were evacuated to other parts of the island. The fires have reportedly damaged at least 26 buildings so far. Meanwhile, a 4-day wildfire in the Greek mainland's Dadia forest is threatening a black vulture habitat, while residents have been forced to flee. The wildfires come as Europe endures a heat wave that has also sparked major fires in France and Italy. Now, a volcano on Japan's southwestern island of Kyushu has erupted. Japan's meteorological agency has reported that the Sakurajima volcano erupted at 8:05 p.m. Sunday local time, sending plumes of smoke and rocks into the sky. The agency declared a level 5 alert, its highest level, for only the second time since 2015. Local residents have been forced to evacuate, but so far there have been no reports of damage or casualties. Sakurajima is known as one of Japan's most active volcanoes. Pope Francis is in Canada to apologize to Indigenous peoples for abuses by Catholic missionaries. Landing in Canada on Sunday, the Pope is expected to make the apology on behalf of the Catholic Church. The Church oversaw more than 80 federally mandated residential schools that forcibly assimilated Indigenous children into mainstream Canadian culture. From the 1800s until 1997, over 150,000 Indigenous children attended the institutions, and many faced abuse. Pope Francis has called the trip, quote, a penitential pilgrimage, and is set to visit a former residential school on Monday. And finally, Comic-Con is back in person for the first time since 2019. The comic book convention in San Diego saw tens of thousands of fans dressing up in cosplay as characters from television, film, and video games. The event, which runs from July 21 to 24, also featured live panels, celebrity attendances, and all the latest announcements on movies and TV shows.
Good morning. The monsoon season came to an end, and intense heat waves will be scorching the country. It's also the time of the year when summer vacation starts, with people trying to escape from the heat. For today, Seoul will see highs rising about 5 degrees higher than yesterday, with heat advisories in place in parts of Gyeongsangdo, Busan, Daegu, and Ulsan. In fact, Gyeongsangdo provinces could see some passing rain during the day, while elsewhere will be under sunny skies with high to very high UV rays. Most regions were free from a tropical night, but brace for some continuous unbearable overnight temperatures from now on. And highs in most parts will be in the low 30s, and sunny skies will be of no help. Seoul and Chungcheon will be going up to 33 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Now, we'll be in grip of sweltering heat day and night from now, so take good care of yourself. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. That wraps up our newscast for this hour. We'll be back tomorrow, though, for our Tuesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for joining us this morning, and do tune into Arirang News for updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.
Thank you.